we doing, everybody? You guys better get hyped. The hat is here. It's been here all week. And it just wouldn't be right if it wasn't here today. It just wouldn't be right. Guys, it's a beautiful Friday. And the weekend is almost here. The only thing between you and that weekend is nonlinear state space representation. And you just have to power through. Oh, I didn't update this title. I've been wondering, are you standing or sitting? I've been standing 24/7. Nonlinear state space. I haven't sat in days. We have a smoothie. All right, everybody, we have a lot to do, so we're going to get started right now. I hope you have this handout in front of you, because we're going to finish it. We're not going to stop until it's done. Okay, so just to recap a little bit, state space form can be linear or nonlinear. From dynamic systems, we only show linear state space form. But on your first homework, you've probably seen you run face-to-face with nonlinear state space representation, so what the heck do you do with it? We're going to do some examples today. All right, so let's say you have an nth order differential equation. You define n states, and I'm calling them x1, x2, x, all the way up to xn. And you might have up to m system inputs, u1, u2, all the way up to um, and you'll have p system outputs. These are what your sensors are outputting from this dynamic system. Y1, Y2, all the way up to YP. So state space form fundamentally is two main sets of equations. You have the state equations, those are the ones up top. And what's special is that these are all first order. So state space is a collection of first order equations, and each of these first order equations could be a nonlinear function of time, the other states, and all of your system inputs. All right. The output equations, we call these y1 through yp. These could also be nonlinear functions of the states and inputs, but notice these do not have a dot on top. They are not differential equations. These are just algebraic equations. All right, so that is state space form, and Usually we use vector notation. So you could define a state vector, input vector, output vector. And I showed you at the end of lecture on Wednesday, when you take the derivative of your state vector, now it's filled with the first derivative of each of your states. You have the nonlinear function for each of those states. Well, you can write that most compactly as a vector function. That's what the arrow's on top of time. It's a function of your state vector and your input vector. And you can do the same thing with your output equation here. And therefore, a state space model can be written compactly as follows. Get ready. Oops. X dot, the vector, is that vector function of time, my states, and my system inputs. And my output equations are the vector function h of time, my states, and my inputs. Okay, now the special case where these functions f and h are linear functions, then the state space model can be written as something that I think you're familiar with. It's this. X dot is ax plus bu. So if that vector function f is linear, that means you can write it out as an A matrix times your states plus a B matrix times your inputs. And your output equation, the C matrix times your state vector plus the D matrix times your input vector. So this is the one you're used to seeing. So let's do a let's get into a little more detail here. Like, what the heck does linear mean anyways? So how do I know when my vector function f can be written as like ax plus bu? Okay, well, you might have seen this in the past at some point, but a function is linear if and only if the function of alpha times one vector plus beta times another vector can be separated out in this way. So if you can separate the function out like this, then it's linear. So what I want to show you is, let's say we just have this function x dot equals ax, and we've always been calling this linear, but why exactly is it linear? Well, it's linear because it's going to satisfy this relationship up above. And we're going to show step by step how it does it. So let's start right here. So x dot equals ax, and we're just going to say this is a vector function of x. So what does it mean if we try to take this function of x, but instead of x have this argument? Well, so we're going to have a, and then instead of x, we're going to have this A matrix times this argument. And, okay, we know that a matrix, you could expand this expression like this. So it's just a matrix operating on the summation of two vectors. And I could definitely break it up like this. And then because these constants are out in front, That's not a vector or anything. I can pull those out in front here. So I'll have alpha times the matrix A times x1 plus beta times the matrix A times x2. And this is the same as alpha f of x1 plus beta f x2. So, because this relationship works out, we call it linear. So that's like the rigorous way of showing that. But in practice, you're more you're going to notice that, okay, I can't put this into a matrix form with A, B, C, and D, and you won't go through this like process of mathematically proving it's linear or nonlinear. You're just going to tell. Okay, a quick note about simulation, and then we're going to get to an example of ODE 45 at the end of today after we do an example. But when we do simulation of aircraft or whatever system, a nice tool in MATLAB, we're going to use ODE 45. So it can take a linear or a nonlinear state space model. You give it some initial conditions, you give it an input vector, and it runs the simulation. Yeah, it runs a simulation and it's going to give back your solution. So I kind of want to skip this. I want to get right to the example. Let's do it. So we have a nonlinear state space equation. Well, we're going to get to it. Okay, these are my system dynamics. It's a second order differential equation, and right here I can see it's going to be nonlinear because it has an x dot times the sine of x. So that's just something I noticed right away. I'm defining f as the system input, and then I have two sensors that are monitoring this system. And what the sensors are telling me, they're giving me back what I call T1 and T2. And so it's a function of the states and the input. So what we're going to do in this example is we're going to put this in state space form. And I'm going to break it down into a bunch of steps. Where am I going? Okay, so the first step is to define the states. Now, the number of states you have is equal to the order of the differential equation for your system. So our differential equation here is second order, and you can tell because the highest derivative is 2. So n equals 2. That's the order of the system. So I need to define two states. And a standard choice for your states is to set the first state. We'll just call them x1 and x2 first. So I just give them names, x1 and x2. A standard definition is to make your first state equal to the lowest order derivative found in the equation. So like the 0th order in that equation. And then your second state, you just take the first derivative of that. Okay? So that's my first step. Just define your states. Then define the input variables. So in this case, I'm going to go back up here. I defined f as the one system input. So we just have one input. So that means that m is equal to 1. I just have one input. And I define my input variable as u1. And that's going to be equal to f. So at this point, we're just like renaming variables. So that's the input. Now we have to look at the p output variables next. So if we scroll back up, we have two system outputs. So p equals 2. And I'll call these outputs y1 and y2. What's the notation between the u vector and the u1? Oh, good question. So if you look in here, you see I have equals, and then I put like a little triangle on top of there. And when you see that, it means definition. So I'm defining my u vector as this variable u1. And I guess it's not really a vector in this case because it just has one entry. But yeah, so when I have this down here as well, I'm just saying defined as. So you could read it as defined as. So my two outputs, T1, T2. And what the heck, why don't we write out what those were? T1 was 3x dot minus f, and then T2 was 4x. Oh, I keep jumping around. Okay. So I got my two outputs defined. So my first three steps: define your states, define your inputs, define your outputs. It's just naming variables. Step 4, differentiate the state vector once. So our state vector was x1, x2, so it's going to be x1 dot, x2 dot. Because I defined x1 to be x, x1 dot will just be x dot, x2 dot will be x double dot. So that just follows from the definition of my state vector. And from our equation, we can write more detail about what x double dot is. So I'm going to scroll up. From here, we can see x double dot is minus x dot sine of x plus f. So I'm going to take this, I'm going to copy it, and I'm going to bring it down here and plug it in. So I just got that from my differential equation. And x dot it's still the same old x dot. All right. So that's the fourth step. Just differentiate your state vector once. Now, fifth step, write the state equations and output equations in terms of the newly defined state, input, and output variables. So what are these new variables? I'm talking about x1 and x2. I'm talking about u1. And I'm talking about y1 and y2. So I want to take all of the equations from steps 1 through 4 and rewrite them in terms of these new variables. All right, so for x dot, I'm looking at this guy right here. And I know that x dot is equal to x2, because I defined my second state to be the velocity term. So now I'm looking at this second entry. This is going to be minus x2 times sine of x1 plus u1. Because remember, I defined f to be u1. Let's do this also with the output vector, which I have to keep reminding myself what it was. Okay, so maybe we'll just bring this down here real quick. Oh, no, I want to copy it. Copy. And we'll paste it, but we will replace these variables. So x dot is x2, f is u1, and x is x1. Now this is state space form. It doesn't have to be an A, B, C, D matrix form to be state space form. So this is what we call a nonlinear state space form, because if I look at the state equations, I wouldn't be able to make a nice A matrix, for example. And the reason is I have this sign term, and there's nowhere for that to go. So you just leave it like this. There's nothing more you need to do. It's state space form. But, so however, I have a step 6. Check if either of these equations are linear and generate ABCD matrices if possible. So I just mentioned for the x dot equation, you can't really do that. But if you look at this equation for the outputs, you could write the output equation in terms of C and D matrices. So I want to do that next. Oh, I guess I was just kind of explaining out what I just said to you, but so we'll leave the state equations like this. We're not going to do anything to them. So let's fill in these output equations. 3x2 minus u1. What was the other one? 4x1. So I can break this into a C matrix times x1, x2 plus a D matrix times u1. So let's do that. This would be 0, 3, 4, 0, minus 1, 0. So that's just the matrix math to finish that up. If you ever have trouble putting something in matrix form like this, when you're just starting, I would say guess. Like throw numbers in these matrices and then multiply out the matrices and see if it gives you back what you know it should be. So sometimes people ask me, like, how do I know if my C and D are correct? Well, multiply it out and see if it gives you back what you know it should be. So if you were to multiply this out, it'll work. Does that make sense? So like the short answer to all this is if you have nonlinear equations and you want to put it in state space form, go as far as putting it in first order form, just separate first order equations. And if you can't form A, B, C, D matrices after that, don't sweat it. Let's do another example. Okay, this one's going to be linear. And in this case, we won't have output equations. We're just going to have the state equation because I didn't define outputs in this case. Okay, so these are our state dynamics. They're second order, and I have 2 inputs, so that's a little different. So my inputs are new 1 and new 2. Those aren't V's, those are the Greek letter new. Okay, we're going to go through this process again. We're going to define our state variables. Well, the order of the system is 2, so we just define 2 states. And then the standard definition is you set x1 equal to the lowest order derivative, which is the 0th derivative in this case. And you just keep going until you get up to the number of states. So n equals 2. All right. Now we're going to define the input variables. Just call them U1 and U2. There's 2 inputs in this case. And those ones are equal to new 1, new 2. All right? Step 3 for me is usually define my output variables, but in this case we don't have outputs in this problem. I just gave you the system dynamics, so we're going to move on. We're going to differentiate the state vector once. So x1 dot, x2 dot, that would be equal to x dot and x double dot. How do you know there are only 2 states? Wouldn't the x double dot make it 3 states? No. So if you look at the differential equation, the order of the system is equal to the highest derivative that you find. So highest derivative 2. So it's a second order differential equation. The order of the differential equation is equal to the number of states. So second order system, 2 states. So you would need a third order system to have 3 states. We would need an x triple dot, an x trip, but we don't have it. Yep, you're very welcome. Okay, so I want to fill in x double dot, so I got to go back up here because I don't remember what it was. Okay, now I'm going to remember. I got it. It's minus b x dot minus kx minus 3 new 1 minus 4 new 2. And then x dot, it's just x dot. Did I get that right? I'm going to check. Oh, jeez. Thank you, Dakota. The signs were wrong. All right. So that's step 4, differentiate the state vector once. Now step 5, write the state equations and output equations. Well, we don't have output equations in this case. In terms of the newly defined state, input, and output variables. Twitch heroes swing again. Yep. Okay, so x dot, so I'm looking up here, right? X dot is x2 minus b x dot, so minus b x2 minus k x1 plus 3u1 plus 3u2. And I don't know why I put another equals over here, because that's all it is. All right. So step 6, check if this is linear and put it in A, B, C, D form if you can. If you can't, don't sweat it. It just means it's nonlinear. But in this case, we can. So I'm going to have a matrix times my state vector plus another matrix times my input vector. So this is going to be 0, 1, minus k, minus b, This is going to be 0, 0, 3. Oh wait, shouldn't one of those be a 4? Okay, thank you very much. Okay. 4, so it should be a 4U2 up here. And then that means this is 4. Okay, so this matrix is the A matrix. This is the B matrix. This is my state vector. This is my input vector. So in this case, we can do AX plus BU. Great. We finished the example, everybody. I skipped some stuff up above. Let's go back to that real quick. And then we're going to hop over to MATLAB. We're going to do a quick review of ODE 45. Okay. So hopefully that helps you with the first 2 problems on the homework. Okay, so we're going to jump to ODE 45 in a second. Oh, MATLAB. Yes, that's right. So when you solve these state space equations, that gives you the state vector as a function of time. So what does the solution look like? Well, usually what we do, let's say we have a system that has 2 states. So like our examples that we did, it was second order. What if we solved either of those equations? That would give us state 1 as a function of time and state 2 as a function of time. So you could have like, let's call this state 1, and maybe it does something like this. So this is x1 at time 0 and x1 at our final time. So you could do that. And then let's not forget about our other state, x2 at time naught, and maybe it's a dotted line, x2 at our final time. So this is typically how we're going to plot our solutions. But it's also interesting to plot these in the phase plane or phase space. You call it the phase plane if it's 2 states. Phase space could be higher dimensional state spaces where you plot the states as a function of each other, not as a function of time. So what would this even look like from the wiggles that I drew? So x1 and x2 are positive, and I don't know, they stay kind of the same. I don't know, but maybe it would look something like this. So there's not 2 lines in this case. There's 1 line that represents the state vector at t naught, and then these are the components of the state vector at tf. And if you ever look up something like the Duffing oscillator, you get some cool patterns in the phase space. You can get, like for a different set of initial conditions, let's do a different color. Like let's say maybe if you do this initial condition, in that same span of time, it might spiral for some systems. And so that point is like x tf. So this phase plane is kind of a typical way of analyzing the response of nonlinear systems as well. All right. Are you guys ready for some MATLAB? pump some jams from MATLAB. Open MATLAB music. Did you know you can play music from MATLAB? There's a command called sound. It could be your primary music system. Incredible, right? Okay, so it really changes everything. I mean, oh, I need to change the title over there. Okay, it's good I came back here though. We're gonna solve this differential equation using ODE 45. Okay, so it's this second order nonlinear dynamics, and we have these two outputs. So that is what we're going to do. If you have MATLAB, you can follow along here. Okay, let's go back. Let's change this title. Boom, now it's right. Okay, so when you do ODE 45, there's a couple things you need to define first. You need to define a time span over which you want to run your simulation. So let's just go like to 5 units of time. Will you post the code afterwards? Yes. Yes. I will post this. There's also already 2 examples of ODE 45 on UB Learns. So this will be a third example. And we need to define some initial conditions for our states. So there's 2 states, x1 and x2. And I don't know, maybe we'll say x1 is equal to 1, x2 is equal to 0. It's whatever the problem specifies. So we have the time span of our simulation, we have our initial conditions, and I'm going to pause here. I'm going to save this. Code examples. Open MATLAB and found my 316 final exam. Terrible. Okay. So we're going to make 2 files because for ODE 45, you want to make a function file. So this function that I'm making right now, or it's not a function. I'm going to save this file in a folder. I'm going to call it like in class 9/4/2020. So this is like my main file. Now I'm going to start a new file. Did you mean opportunity? Okay. Now this new file that I made, it's going to be a function, and what this function is going to return is the x dot vector. So if I go back to like here, you're making a function to return this x dot vector. This guy. So x dot, that's what it's returning, and then I'll call it my ODE function. And first we'll just say it's a function of t and x. This is just standard for using ODE 45, okay? You always put t and then x here. I guess you could pick other variable names, but this is just standard. So first of all, x dot has to be a 2x1 column vector. So what I like to do is I just first like to make a column filled with zeros that's 2x1, just so I know it's the right size. And then I say the first element of that is it's going to be x1 dot, which is just x2, right? Let's go over here. So this is my x dot vector, but I want to keep it in terms of my state, so I actually want to use this. So x dot 1, the first entry of that vector is x2. X dot 2 is, what is it? Should it be 0s, 2, 1? Isn't that what I put? Isn't that what it says? Equals? What's going on with you? Okay. So the next one is minus x2 times sine x1 plus u1. I don't have a dash. Don't tell me I have a dash. Okay. Minus x2 times sine x1 plus u1. It might be the resolution. It might just be the resolution here, but on my screen I have equals there. Yeah, it's okay. It's okay. Okay, but notice I have this u1 here. Now there's different ways to handle this, but I want to show you this way. You could put u1. Top one looks like a dash. The rest are cool. What if I like do? What if I just like move it? Oh, whoops. What did I do? What if I move it around? Does it still look like a dash? I don't know. But anyways, maybe you have a stash. No, you're right. I've been growing like a Bieber stash. Okay, so I'm gonna show you how to pass in an additional variable u1. So the purpose of this function is just to return the x dot vector, and this was a new file, and I'm gonna save it in the same folder. So what did I do? I had it in the example ODE folder, and oh shoot, I already have an ODE function named this. I have to name this something else. I'm gonna call it function 2. My ODE function 2. Okay, so I made a function that returns the x dot vector. Now I'm gonna go back to my original file, but I'm gonna copy this heading and bring it back with me, just so I have it. Okay, so we're gonna call our ODE function from this other file, which is like my main file. So here's the syntax. I'm gonna see if I can remember it. Usually I have to just Google it over and over again because I can't remember exactly how it goes. But we're gonna try this off the top of my head. So ODE 45, and then you put this at, and then you do t and x. So it's going to be the same variables that you put here. So that's why I put t and x. It'll be the same as these first two. And then I already forgot. So I'm going to go back to my cheat file that I made, because I was doing this earlier. It's good that you see this, because this is what I do in practice anyways. I never remember what it is. I just Google ODE 45 and look, I was doing great. Okay, so what we need, so the next thing you add is you take the header for your function, you just paste it in there. And then the next argument, you put in the t-span that you specified and the initial conditions. And then you delete your cheat file. You just delete it. Okay, so I said I want to simulate over this time span. This is my initial state vector. Okay, I put at tx. This is the function I made, which is tx, but it also has u1. So I need to define what u1 is. For now, we're just going to make u1 a constant. So let's just say it's like a unit step input. So that u1 is just equal to 1 for all time. We can also make this a function of time, and I can show you how to do that later. You can put an interpolation function within your ODE function, and so you can definitely have inputs that are a function of time. Okay, then ODE 45 is going to do all the work. So then we're just gonna plot the results. T, X. Let's run this and see if it gives us an error. Did it give us an error? Of course, it always does. X1. Oh, okay. Line 5. Look what I did here. Missed a parentheses. Unacceptable. Totally unacceptable. Okay. Let's do this again. Okay, great. So it plotted state 1 and state 2. But we always need our labels. So just to refresh you, I'm sure you guys know this, like X label, it's going to be time for me. For my Y label, I'm just going to call those the state coefficients, because usually the states all have different units, so it'd be hard to specify one all-encompassing unit for that. And I like to make a legend X1 and X2. So let's update that plot. Ooh, let's add a grid. We're adding a grid. Okay. So here it is. Now it has a grid. It has my states. Okay, state coefficients. I got my labels. Everything looks great. Now, what about the output equations? These are our states, but if you remember, I also have my output equations. So these outputs are a function of the states and the input. And I even had a C matrix. Yep. But now that I'm looking at this, the easiest way to get the outputs would just be to directly use these equations. So let's just do that. So let's say y1 is 3 times x2. Now notice what I did here. So what does x look like? Let's go over here. The size of x is 65 by 2, so it's 2 columns. All right. So x1 is the first column, x2 is the second column. So what I'm saying here, y1 is 3 times x2, but x2 is the second column of x from ODE 45. And then I have to add plus u1. And then y2 was just 4 times x1. And I guess if you wanted to, you could just redefine x1 as x1 and redefine x2 as x2. And then you could just work with those variables, but you know, it's kind of up to you. Okay, so let's make another plot just with our outputs. t, ooh, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to say y. First column is y1, second column is y2. And then I can just use plot ty, and it'll automatically plot both columns, y1, y2, output, and let's run this. Boom. Now we have our outputs. All right. So we did a simulation of a nonlinear second order system using nonlinear state space representation. We integrated it with ODE 45, and then we plotted the outputs. So we're just totally out of control at this point. Does this make sense? You guys have done this before, right? I think you do it in... Does Dr. Darrell have you do this in intermediate dynamics? I think that's what some of you said before. Does it matter that what you defined U1 as, or is that arbitrary? Arbitrary. I'm just trying to use the same variable names that I used in the notes. I just try to keep it consistent. Yes, we did some of it, but I think it makes more sense now. This was a 345 topic. Great. What thing, phenomena, and arrow controls will this be useful for? This is going to be useful for any time we simulate the equations of motion for an aircraft. The equations of motion for an aircraft, depending on how you break it down, it's somewhere between 4 and 8 states. Typically, if you're doing like longitudinal and lateral motions, and they're nonlinear equations as well. So we did this in space dynamics with Cressidas 2 for orbital mechanics. Okay, perfect. Yeah, if you do orbital mechanics, then that'll be, I'm sure he uses this and it's no problem. But yeah, the equations of motion for aircraft, the kinematic equations for aircraft as well are going to be nonlinear. So it's going to be linear and rotational motion tracking. Yeah. So like one of the homeworks coming up, the first time this will become really important is, I think I mentioned this before, we have data from a quadcopter doing a little maneuver. So we have acceleration data from a sensor, X, Y, and Z. We have angular motion, angular velocity data from a gyroscope. And the kinematic equations that describe the attitude of the quadcopter as a function of time, those are nonlinear. So we're going to set those up in state space form, integrate them, and recover the original motion of the quadcopter purely from sensor measurements. It's pretty sweet. You're very welcome. Are you guys figuring out the homework? I'm just trying to get like a general sense. Was it like, I mean, I got some questions about the nonlinear state space stuff. Give question 2 cheat codes, please. Oh, come on. Attempting to figure out fsolve. Listen, fsolve is, actually I think I have an example here. Fsolve is real easy to use. Okay, let me give you an example here. What did I do? X2. So I just made up a nonlinear function here. This isn't from the homework. Maybe I'll go. Maybe we'll go back here first. So, okay, let's say, so fsolve is just solving a nonlinear function. This pin is way too green for me. And I'm just gonna make up a nonlinear function. So x cubed sine x minus x squared e to the x. Actually, I'm gonna say like is equal to x squared e to the x. So fsolve is meant to solve a nonlinear function like this for x, or you can actually do it for any number of variables. Like it could be a nonlinear function x and like y as well, and it can solve for both variables. But let's just limit it to one. So the first thing you do is you define a function f of x from this that's equal to 0. So if I bring this x squared over to the other side, it'll be equal to 0, right? So what you do next is you make a function in MATLAB that is this. So let me show you what I did. A function f, it's my nonlinear function, that's just what I called it. You could call it anything. It's a function of x, and all I said in here is f is equal to x cubed times sine x minus x squared times the e to the x. So the same equation is here, right? I just brought it into MATLAB world. And let me show you how easy fsolve is to use. So the next thing you do, where did I go? So this is how fsolve works. You tell it the function that you defined. So my nonlinear function is, well, this one over here. It's just f is equal to 0. And then you give it an initial guess. So this is like what a potential solution might be. It's not going to be the right solution because it's something that you guess. So I just guessed like, well, what if it's 0.5? Oops. But for your initial guess, you should use something reasonable. And let me tell you why. Because nonlinear functions tend to have more than one solution. And it could have many solutions. So you want to pick an initial guess that you think is something like physically reasonable. So in the homework, you're solving for a equilibrium angle of attack, right? There's a nonlinear function. Why does the equal sign look like a minus sign? I don't know. Wait, what if I do? Hey, that looks better, right? It just doesn't show the chat at the same time. What was I saying? Oh, yeah. In the homework, you're solving for an equilibrium angle of attack. So pick an angle of attack that's close to what you think it might be. Like, you're going to solve for the angle of attack using a linearized assumption or something. You could use that as your initial guess. Okay, anyways, you just run this. And then it gives you back like what it found. Easy as that. It's easy as that. You give an initial guess. You define your function, your nonlinear function, set it equal to 0. Give it your initial guess, and you fsolve it. Boom. How do we handle the b times alpha dot term? What do you mean? Whatever do you mean? In the equation of motion? Ah. Well, what is the definition of equilibrium? In this, well, depending on the type of equilibrium you're talking about, velocity isn't always zero. But for this airfoil problem, when we're talking about equilibrium, we mean that the airfoil is just fixed, so it has no angular velocity. Boom, got it. Can you run the example code again to see the output plot? Sure. What was I doing? Are you talking about this one? Or are you talking about this one? Like I said, I always forget exactly the sequence here. But if you look up, like the MATLAB documentation that they have online is fantastic. So I just Google ODE 45. I pull up the MATLAB page, and then I just grab it. Rue says, I have one quick question regarding your sponsored project for 451. Can I ask it here? Sure, you can ask. Gotcha, I think it's a saving problem. Interesting. Yeah, make sure your ODE function is saved in the same folder as your file. Will you be available after this lecture in Discord? Well, no, because I have office hours for road vehicle dynamics on a different Discord. But Saeed, our teaching assistant, is going to be on Discord from 4:30 to 5:30 today. So definitely check that out. Rue says, all right, the project says you have to have have to control some objects. So do we have to choose our own object, or will you give it to us? So if you read the description, it's a balancing demo. And I don't tell you exactly what you need to balance, but I posted like a YouTube video in that project description to show you an example of the type of thing I'd be looking for. Just wanted to talk about the controls project the other day. Our team is ready to go. Okay, so what you should do, I need to talk to Dr. Rehanian to see like how this officially works. But I want to teams that are interested, I need to see where their prior experience is, like with controls stuff. Because this is a deceptively hard project. That's why in the description I wrote, like, you need a lot of experience with Arduino. You need to have a lot of experience with dynamic systems, because this is really challenging. So if your team's ready to go, we need to set up a meeting, and I need to gauge like where you guys stand, because I want to set you up for success. We can form an experience list for each team member. That would be perfect. That would be perfect. If you email me that, going to buy a tablet today for note taking. Any recommendations? I can tell you what I use. I use the Microsoft Surface. So it's my... Are you just looking for like a tablet to write? Or are you looking for like an all-encompassing thing? Because I guess my answer is different for... Just like, okay, just a tablet to write. Okay, my friend... Let me text him. Okay, I'll see if he gets back to me. Oh, right, you sent me that, you sent me that MATLAB animation. Yeah, that's cool. Ooh, Samsung tablet S5e would do the job. Wait, but is that... Are you looking for just like a tablet as in a writing platform that you would like plug via USB into the computer? Because there's different options. Let's see. Because they have stuff like this, which you could plug in like via USB or whatever and just annotate a PDF on your computer. And this is probably more cost effective than getting, yeah, like this one's $80. So you don't have to get a tablet with a screen per se. Yeah, so you could do something like this. Yeah, my friend uses something like this. He uses the Wacom Bamboo something. Okay. Shrek. Will Fridays typically be recitation or lecture? Syllabus says recitation until 3:50. Yep. So I'm only going to go till, I mean, it's 4:08, but we ended the content of today really close to 3:50. I know I didn't officially say that, but, and then I'll probably just hang around to chat and take some questions. But this is, Fridays will be mostly problems and, covering any stuff that I didn't finish during the week. Like so I finished the set of notes today, and then I did like an ODE 45 example. Okay, what I would end up, save some time printing. Yeah, get something like this. Okay, Dr. Estes, just to clarify, for the 451 project, we have to make our own model, right? It won't be something that's given by you. That's true because I don't want to constrain your design. Like, the only constraint I'm giving you is it has to balance something, but there's so many different demos you could build. Like, if you had something in mind, I can point you to resources like for an inverted pendulum. I know some good papers about that. Or like for a robot like a robot like this, where it's just two wheels and it's balancing. Why can I not figure out how to put this in front of the camera? I started this and I never finished it. Good news is most of the math for the puzzle pieces of the whole model is already worked out. Metronomes are also great to read about, look at. Yeah, I mean, there's so many different types of balancing systems. All right, people. Remember, if you have questions about the homework, there's office hours on Discord tonight, 4:30 to 5:30. Saeed will be there. He's excellent. Fun lecture. Thank you. Thank you very much. Monday, we do have lecture. I know it's Labor Day. But we do have class on Labor Day. Good lecture. Have a good day. Thank you very much, LT. Peace out, everybody.